The sound that disrupted the evening silence was not merely the impact of a glass cup on the tiled kitchen floor. It was the sound of my life as I knew it, fragmenting into a million irreparable fragments. The sudden silence was punctuated by the sharp crack of a gunshot, which signified the conclusion of my upbringing. Emma, for the love of God. The living room was filled with the familiar blend of irritation and disappointment as my father's voice bellowed. Daniel, a man who shared my DNA but not my world, strode into the kitchen. I had recently begun to think of him as Daniel in my mind. His face was contorted with fury over a $5 piece of glassware, a mask of perpetual sternness. Is it not possible for you to complete a straightforward task without causing a mess? Unsteady. I am consistently clumsy. Lorraine, my mother, followed him, her demeanor as subdued and remorseful as a specter. She wrung her hands, her gaze shifting from my father's rigid back to the sparkling fragments on the floor, and then to me. Her expression was not one of concern for me, but rather of concern for the approaching storm. My father's emotions were professionally weatherproofed by her. My heart was beating against my rib cage with the force of a bird that was ensnared. My hands trembled, not as a result of the glass falling, but rather as a result of the words that were rapidly ascending my larynx. The sentences that I had meticulously rehearsed in the mirror for a week were rendered meaningless when confronted with the triviality of their fury. The truth, which was raw and horrifying, was all that remained. "I must convey a message to you," I managed to say, my voice scarcely audible. My father scoffed as he bent down to angrily sweep the larger fragments of glass into a dustpan. "What is the current situation? Did you flunk that mathematics examination? Sending you to that public school was an error, I informed your mother." Fills your mind with drivel. "No, it is not that," I replied, my voice gaining a sliver of fortitude. I inhaled deeply, allowing the aroma of pine, Saul, and my mother's pot roast to fill my airways for the final time. "I am pregnant." The scoring ceased. The act of wringing one's hands was discontinued. The silence that followed was more heavy and oppressive than the initial one. It was a vacuum that extracted all the air and warmth from the chamber. The dustpan was held loosely in my father's hand as he gradually straightened up. He gazed at me for the first time in the entire evening. His eyes, which were typically characterized by a cold and critical demeanor, were now ablaze with a wrath that was so intense that it felt like a physical heat. A hand flew to my mother's mouth as she gulped. She wept, her eyes wide with astonishment. However, they were not cries of compassion. They were sobs of shame. "What are you?" My father's voice was perilously low. I repeated, lifting my jaw, "I am pregnant." My voice remained unwavering, despite the fact that my body was quivering. The detonation was both immediate and catastrophic. "You foolish, foolish girl!" He threw the dustpan against the wall, roaring. It was forgotten as it clattered to the ground. "Your life has been irreparably damaged. Are you aware of the actions you have taken? Everything you possess has been discarded. We have labored hard for college, a career, and everything else." My mother begged, "Daniel, please." But he was unresponsive. I was bound to the tracks, and his fury was like a rampaging train. He spat out the word disappointment, which struck me with the force of a strike. "That is who you are. A total and absolute letdown. This family has been dishonored by your actions." My mother began to weep quietly. "Emma, how could you? How could you be so irresponsible? What will the residents' opinions be? What will I disclose to my book club?" Their words whirled around me, a vortex of their own social anxieties and shattered expectations. They did not inquire about my well-being at any point. They did not inquire about the father's identity or whether I was frightened at any point. They did not inquire whether I required assistance. Their immediate response was not one of concern for their child, but rather one of concern for their reputation. The in everything we've worked for was a fabrication. It was consistently about them. During the subsequent minutes, there was a flurry of weeping and shouting. There's not mine. I stood there, feeling an unusual sensation of tranquility wash over me. It was a state of tranquility that was inevitable. I had intuitively anticipated that this would be their response. I had merely hoped that my assumptions were incorrect. My father's voice was raw with rage as he finally said, "Get your things. I require your departure from this residence. This evening." Daniel, no. My mother wept, finally exhibiting a glimmer of maternal instinct. There is a lack of light. To what location will she travel? I am indifferent to her destination, he stated, his gaze fixed on me, devoid of any affection or tenderness. She constructed her bed, consequently, she is permitted to sleep in it. This residence is intended for the family, not for failures. The term remains suspended in the air, serving as a final, fatal strike. Failure. I refrained from engaging in a debate. I refrained from pleading. Their voices receded as I turned and proceeded up the stairs to my room. I packed a single duffel bag with the practical items I had accumulated over the past few weeks, rather than the sentimental items of a childhood that would be left behind. These items included a toothbrush, a few changes of clothing, my laptop, and a small, worn teddy bear that Landon's father had won for me at a carnival. It was the sole remnant of him that I possessed. Upon my return to the ground floor, they were positioned by the front door in a manner reminiscent of two menacing statuary. The door was held open by my father. My mother's visage was concealed beneath a handkerchief, and she refused to gaze at me. I walked past them, stepping out into the frigid night air without uttering a word. Another abrupt, conclusive noise emanated from the door as it closed behind me. The porch light, which had always been so welcoming, now appeared to taunt me as it illuminated my solitary figure on the sidewalk. I stood there for a moment, the duffel bag feeling impossibly weighty in my hand. I was 18 years old, expectant, and completely isolated. They were under the impression that they had cast me into the street with nothing. They were mistaken. I had a strategy. I walked down the block with a steady and confident gait, and I retrieved my phone. I did not contact an acquaintance. I refrained from contacting the father of the infant. I requested a vehicle. To what destination? The driver's voice was fatigued as he inquired. I provided him with an address on the opposite side of town, a location that my parents were unfamiliar with. I gazed back at the home where I was raised for the final time as the vehicle departed from the curb. The lights were illuminated, emitting a warm, golden radiance that perfectly captured the essence of a contented family. An impeccable falsity. They were likely already in the process of deliberating how to present this narrative to their acquaintances indoors. The issue was resolved. I turned my head and gazed forward, observing the city lights as they blinked past the window. I furiously wiped away a single tear that traced a frigid path down my cheek. This was not the conclusion. This marked the commencement. They had evicted me from their residence, but they had also granted me freedom. A drab, 3-story apartment building was the destination of the vehicle. I paid the driver, collected my luggage, and proceeded to the second floor. In the lock of apartment 20B, I inserted a key that I had concealed for a month. A tiny, empty studio apartment was revealed when the door was opened. It was nothing more than a box that contained a small kitchenette and a toilet. The air was stale, and the solitary window overlooked a brick wall. It was desolate, frigid, and entirely devoid of allure. Additionally, it was entirely mine. I placed my luggage on the floor and proceeded to the window. Between the structures, I could observe a small portion of the night sky. I placed a hand on my still, flat stomach, the small secret that had cost me everything and was now my sole purpose for being. I murmured into the empty room, "It's just you and me now, kid." I finally felt the full weight of the situation. The loneliness was a tangible presence that pressed down on me from all angles. It was as though the apprehension was a cold knot in my stomach. The grief for the family I believed I had and the affection I now understood to be conditional washed over me. It was at that moment that the tears began to fall, silent and scalding. I allowed myself to weep, huddled on the floor of that vacant apartment, as I lamented the passing of the girl I used to be. However, a new sensation began to emerge within me, overpowering the grief and dread as the first hints of dawn began to gray the sky. The sensation was abrasive, frigid, and akin to a diamond. This was the result of determination. My parents had referred to me as a failure, a disappointment. They had dismissed me. I would dedicate the remainder of my life to demonstrating their errors. I was not merely constructing a life for my child. I was constructing a fortress, brick by excruciating brick, that they would never, ever be permitted to enter. Emma, their daughter, was no longer my name. Emma, Lannon's mother, was my name. I was merely beginning my journey. I had initiated my covert preparations 3 weeks prior to that fateful evening. Upon observing the 2 pink lines on the plastic stick, a switch in my mind was flicked. A portion of me, the teenage part of me, was horrified. However, an additional, more profound aspect, one that I was previously unaware of, began to function with a harrowing clarity. I was acquainted with my parents. I was aware that their affection was fragile and contingent upon their expectations being fulfilled. I was unable to rely on them. I was the sole source of support. A lifeline was my occupation at the time. Dr. Weston operated a private medical clinic where I served as a receptionist on a part-time basis. He was a kindly, grandfatherly figure with twinkling eyes and a perpetually serene demeanor, a semi-retired general practitioner. He recognized more in me than my parents ever did. One afternoon, as I was reorganizing the entire patient filing system, a task that had been neglected for years, he said, "You have a good head on your shoulders, Emma. Don't ever allow anyone to convince you that you are merely a receptionist. You are sharp, efficient, and unafraid of hard work." His words were akin to water on arid earth. I began to assume additional responsibilities, such as managing inventory for supplies and learning the medical billing software. In essence, I became the office manager without the title or the compensation, Dr. Weston observed. He began to provide me with articles regarding business management and healthcare administration. He recognized in me a potential that I was only beginning to recognize in myself. I had enrolled in a variety of online community college courses, including Accounting 101, Introduction to Business Law, and Principles of Management, as a result of his quiet encouragement and my own impending distress. I would spend each evening, after my parents had retired for the night, bent over my laptop, my world condensing to the glow of the screen, assimilating information like a sponge. Every dollar I earned from my job that was not promptly spent on gas or lunch was transferred to a secret bank account. Although it was insufficient, it was a beginning. My evasion was initiated by this. I signed the lease for the studio apartment a week prior to the glass cup shattering, using the confidential money to pay the first month's rent and security deposit. I had informed the proprietor that I was a student in search of a tranquil environment. He had not inquired. My lifeboat was that diminutive, barren chamber. Currently, the lifeboat appeared to be appallingly diminutive in the stark light of a new day. The initial months were characterized by a rush of intense survival. I promptly secured additional hours at Dr. Weston's clinic. He accepted my half-truth that I had relocated to become more self-sufficient without question. I maintained my pregnancy as a private matter, concealing it beneath airy scrubs. There was an exhausting monotony to the days. Awaken at 6 a.m., travel to the clinic by bus, which will take you across the city. While my feet swelled and a wave of morning sickness threatened to overwhelm me, I would work a 9-hour shift, beaming at patients. Return to my vacant residence by bus. Consume a peanut butter sandwich or instant noodles at a reduced cost. Afterward, I would open my laptop and continue to study until my eyes were burning and the words on the screen began to sway. I was fueled by a desperate, primal need to establish a stable foundation before the baby arrived, and I was operating on fumes. The loneliness was an ongoing discomfort. I had no acquaintances to contact, as my parents had consistently advised me to concentrate on my academic pursuits and discourage the development of intimate friendships. Alex, the father of the infant, was a spirit. Smart and ambitious, he was a lad I had encountered the previous summer, and he had his own aspirations of attending medical school. We experienced a transient, intense romance that dissipated as rapidly as it had begun. His reaction to my pregnancy was one of distress, but it was not malicious. He provided me with a few $100s, which was all he had, and informed me that he needed to concentrate on his future. He was not a demon, he was merely a frightened child, much like myself. I was aware that I could not depend on him, and I never contacted him again. This was the path I was to follow, and I would do so independently. Hiding my abdomen became impossible as it began to expand. I was trembling with fear that Dr. Weston would terminate me on the day I eventually disclosed the information. I stammered through the explanation as I stood before his large oak desk, my hands clasped behind my back. His expression was unreadable as he listened attentively. He maintained his silence for an extended period following my conclusion. His gaze was compassionate as he simply gazed at me. Finally, he spoke softly. "Emma? Ah, you are one of the most diligent and capable young women I have ever encountered. Being a mother not alter that." He paused, a small smile flickering on his lips. "If anything, it will make you stronger. We will now need to make some modifications to your workstation in order to enhance your comfort. Additionally, we will address your alternatives for maternal leave. You have a place here for as long as you desire." I wept not out of sorrow, but out of an immense sense of relief. It was the first instance of unconditional compassion that I had encountered in several months. However, my body was beginning to betray me. I was completely fatigued at 7 months pregnant. I had taken on a second job, a weekend data entry task that I could do from home in order to earn additional income. However, on a particular Friday, my replacement at the clinic called in ill, and I consented to work a double shift. It was an error. It was nearly 10 p.m. When I departed the clinic that evening, a cold, unrelenting rain was descending. My feet were aching, I was drenched, and the baby was kicking up a fury. My vision began to tunnel as I staggered to the bus stop. The streetlights blurred into long, watery streaks as the world tilted sideways. I recollect thinking, I simply need to sit down for a split second. Suddenly, I found myself gazing upward at the apprehensive countenance of Dr. Weston. He was kneeling beside me on the damp pavement, and his vehicle had haphazardly driven up to the curb, its headlights piercing the rain. "Emma, is it possible for you to hear me?" I had experienced a loss of consciousness. He assisted me in standing up and directed me to the heated, dry passenger seat of his vehicle. He presented me with a Wesley bar and a bottle of water from his glove compartment. "You are exerting yourself excessively," he stated, his tone being both compassionate and authoritative. "This is not sustainable, my dear." The silence in the car was a combination of my humiliation and his quiet concern as he drove me home. He did not simply leave me off at my desolate apartment complex when we arrived. He ceased the engine and gazed at me. "My sister, Catherine, is a senior director in the finance department at Harrington Medical," he stated, removing a pen and a piece of paper from his coat pocket. "It is a healthcare corporation of staggering size. Particularly in their billing and records divisions, they maintain an extensive remote work program. It would provide stability, benefits, and the opportunity to work from home following the birth of the infant." A name and a number were inscribed on the paper by him. "This is her direct line. I have already informed her about you. I composed a letter of recommendation for you. It is located in the glove compartment. Accept it." I was taken aback. "Weston, I am at a loss for words. Say that you will take care of yourself and that baby," he said, his kind eyes meeting mine. "That is all the gratitude I require." That piece of paper was not merely a job referral, it was a lifeline. The following day, I contacted Catherine, and within 2 weeks, I had completed a succession of phone interviews. Harrington Medical employed me as a novice accounting clerk who worked remotely. The compensation was substantially higher. Health insurance was included, and most importantly, it was a position that could be performed from home. I labored at the clinic for the final 2 weeks, and my heart was so overwhelmed with gratitude that it felt as though it might burst. 2 months later, I delivered a healthy, adorable baby boy. I gave him the name Landon. I experienced a love that was so passionate and protective that it was breathtaking while holding him in my arms in that stark, lonely hospital room. Every moment of fear and loneliness, every weary night, and every sacrifice was worthwhile to him. He was the object of my intent. I considered him to be my entire existence. The subsequent 2 years formed a crucible. They were a compilation of days that were fueled by caffeine and evenings that were deprived of sleep. The rhythmic tapping of my keyboard, the quiet hum of the baby monitor, and Landon's cries were all part of a repeating cycle in my existence. The 4 walls of that studio apartment were the extent of my universe. I would be on a conference call with my headset on, swaying Landon's bassinet with my foot. I would be responsible for the processing of invoices at 3 a.m. Due to the fact that it was the sole opportunity for solitude that I had, I ate the cold remnants while standing over the sink, my eyes fixed on the laptop screen. However, I was expanding. I was not merely a cog in the machine at Harrington. I consumed every conceivable piece of information. I conducted in-depth research on the company's financial structures, self-taught advanced data analysis, and participated in optional online training modules on weekends. I established my worth. Catherine, the sister of Dr. Weston, served as my mentor via remote communication. She was equitable, no nonsense, and sharp. She acknowledged my work ethic and appetite. She assigned me more intricate assignments, and I consistently successfully completed them ahead of schedule and without any errors. My financial situation gradually improved, albeit cruelly. The covered bank account began to expand. I had saved enough money for a down payment on a small, 2-bedroom rental house in a secure, quiet suburb with excellent schools when Landon was 2 years old. I observed Landon's initial wobbly steps on the lawn as I stood in the small, sunlit backyard on the day we relocated. We possessed a residence, a genuine residence. Although it was insignificant, It was a paradise in comparison to the place we had previously visited. Our refuge was that diminutive residence. It was the location where Landon uttered his first word, "Dada." Ironically, although he promptly transitioned to "Mama," where we constructed forts out of blankets in the living room, and where I read him bedtime tales every night, regardless of my exhaustion. It was the location from which I continued to ascend. My career at Harrington Medical was on a consistent upward trajectory. The junior clerk was promoted to the position of accounting associate. An associate was promoted to a senior analyst. I was renowned for my capacity to simplify intricate financial systems and optimize inefficient procedures. I was not merely fulfilling my duties, I was also enhancing the systems that were in my vicinity. I was promoted to a managerial position by the time Landon was 5 and beginning kindergarten. But it also meant a salary that enabled me to breathe despite the additional responsibilities and extended hours. I was no longer living paycheck to paycheck for the first time in my adult existence. I could afford to enroll Landon in soccer, purchase him new shoes without first reviewing my bank balance, and order a pizza on a Friday night without feeling guilty. Although these were minor victories, they were significant to me. Each one was a brick in the fortress I was constructing around my son and me. A fortress constructed not from anger or revenge, but rather from resilience, hard labor, and the unwavering love of a mother. My parents had attempted to compose my narrative for me, a tragic tale of a daughter who failed. They were unaware that I was occupied with the composition of my own epic, and the most captivating chapters were yet to be written. On the day of the promotion, I was 26 years old. I sat in my diminutive home office, gazing at the email from Catherine, who was now a vice president. The subject line was straightforward: "Congratulations. I had been appointed as the head of operations for my entire division." The new position was accompanied by a 6-figure salary, stock options, and a corner office in the new corporate headquarters downtown. However, I was still able to work remotely as required. I did not initially consider the financial or prestige implications. Landon was the name. My heart was pounding in my chest as I closed my laptop. I examined the diminutive residence that had served as our refuge for the previous 4 years. It had been of great assistance to us, however, it abruptly appeared to be inadequate, a vestige of a life that we were about to abandon. I steered my parsimonious yet dependable sedan to Landon's elementary school, my hands firmly grasping the steering wheel. I arrived a few minutes early, so I parked and awaited my son by watching the entrances. My breath was caught in my throat as he finally emerged, his backpack bouncing on his shoulders and a broad, gap-toothed grin on his face. He was exceedingly pleased. He was in good health. He was all-encompassing. He hurried to the vehicle and climbed into the passenger seat, securing himself like the responsible young man that he was. "Hello, Mother. What is the matter?" I received a perfect score on my spelling exam. "That is my brilliant son." I ruffled his hair as I spoke. "I also have a surprise for you. However, it is classified as a covered operation. Are you capable of managing it?" His irises were ablaze with enthusiasm. "A covert mission. Is this for real?" "Actually," I stated as I engaged the vehicle's transmission. However, instead of turning toward our modest rental home, I directed my vehicle in the opposite direction, toward the wealthiest neighborhood in the city, where my parents continue to reside. However, we refrained from traveling to their street. We proceeded to a new development at Tranquil Call, the sack that was adorned with exquisite, recently constructed residences. Each residence boasted a meticulously maintained landscape and a 2-car garage. I entered the driveway of a two-story brick house that was visually appealing, featuring a stately oak front door and expansive windows. In the luxuriant green grass, a diminutive was signal D affixed. Landon gazed at me with bewilderment. Mother, where are we? This is the surprise, I stated, my voice faintly trembling. I deactivated the engine and exhaled deeply. What are your thoughts on it? It is enormous, he said, his nose pressing against the window. Does your friend reside in this location? In a sense, I replied, my expression softening into a gentle smile. I retrieved a new set of keys from my purse. I suspended them in front of him. Landon, this is our new residence. His jaw fell. Or residence. Is it for us? For us? I reiterated, my voice brimming with emotion. And the most delightful aspect, it is ours. The entirety of it. I've purchased it with cash this morning. I will eternally cherish the memory of the expression on his face, which was a blend of disbelief and pure, unadulterated joy. We exited the vehicle and proceeded to the front door. I inserted the key into the lock and we entered. The house was devoid of all furnishings and emanated the aroma of freshly painted walls and new carpets. Dust motes were illuminated by the sunlight that poured through the expansive windows, which caused them to dance in the air. The immense open space reverberated with the sound of our voices. Landon immediately began to run, his sneakers squeaking on the polished hardwood floors and his joyful cries echoing off the walls as he explored each room. Tears welled in my eyes as I leaned against the doorframe. These were not the weeping of a solitary, frightened girl in a frigid studio apartment. These were the tears of a woman who had successfully fought in a conflict. This residence was not merely a residence. A statement was made. It was a tribute to each and every sacrifice, every neglected meal, and every sleepless night. It was the tangible representation of my commitment to that minuscule infant all those years ago. We were unharmed. We were at home. The subsequent 15 years transpired in a flurry of late night work assignments, soccer games, parent-teacher conferences, and the beautiful, chaotic rhythm of a life well lived. I excelled at Harrington Medical, ascending the corporate ladder until I was appointed senior vice president, where I reported directly to the C-suite. Landon transformed from a gap-toothed child to a smart, compassionate, and wickedly funny adolescent who was the epicenter of my world. We lived a peaceful and enjoyable existence, which was wholly determined by our own preferences. I rarely ventured into the locked chamber that was my past. Alex, Landon's father, had achieved success as a cardiothoracic surgeon in Boston. At my insistence, we had reestablished contact when Landon was 10. I desired for my son to be acquainted with his father. Their relationship was cordial, albeit somewhat distant. Alex contributed to a college fund that I had already fully financed myself, and he sent birthday cards and Christmas presents. He was a component of Landon's existence, however, he was not a component of mine. Additionally, my parents were spirits. Since that evening, I had not encountered or conversed with them. I learned through the grapevine of distant relatives that they had informed everyone that I had run off with a boy, that I was rebellious, and that I had broken their hearts. They had obliterated my son and me from their history. It was a dull ache, the phantom pain of a long amputated limb, but it ached. Then, a week after my 33rd birthday, a missive finally arrived. It was addressed in the familiar, meandering cursive of my mother. I opened it with trembling in my hand. It was succinct and direct. They were aware of my residence. They were aware of my accomplishments. They expressed regret. They desired to meet me and the grandson they had never met. A tidal wave of emotions raged within me as I reread the letter a dozen times. Fury, resentment, a fleeting glimpse of the ancient, deeply rooted anguish. However, curiosity is also a factor. I was no longer the terrified 18-year-old girl. I was a woman who was in charge of her existence. I was in possession of all the cards. Following a conversation with Landon, who was cautiously fascinated, I concurred. I contacted the number located at the bottom of the letter. My mother's voice was hesitant and fragile. I maintained a composed and professional demeanor. I extended an invitation to them to join me for Sunday luncheon at my residence. I was not anxious on the day they were scheduled to arrive. I experienced an unusual sense of tranquility, although I did not have anything to prove. There were certain aspects of myself that I desired them to observe. I glanced at the mirror for one final time when the doorbell rang. I wore a dress that was both modest and elegant, and my hair was styled. My makeup was understated. I appeared and felt as though I was a woman who was aware of her own value. I opened the door. Daniel and Lorraine were standing on my veranda, and for a brief period, I was unable to identify them. It appeared that they had contracted. My father's harsh edges had been softened by age. His hair was now more silver than black. My mother appeared fatigued, with permanent lines of anxiety engraved around her eyes. They were merely an elderly man and woman. Their eyes widened as they observed the residence that was situated behind me. They gazed at the high ceilings of the foyer, the gleaming parquet floors, and the tastefully expensive art on the walls, their jaws agape. This society was beyond their upper middle class aspirations. This was genuine riches. Emma, my mother whispered, as if she was unable to comprehend that it was Iba. Greetings, mother. My voice was even as I addressed my father. I implore you to enter. But they entered the building, conducting an examination of the surroundings in the manner of visitors in a palace. I escorted them to the spacious, well-lit living room, which provided a view of the expansive, meticulously landscaped rear, which included a swimming pool. Eventually, my mother wept. Emma, I am sorry, we were entirely mistaken. We were exceedingly arrogant and ignorant. Is it possible for you to ever forgive us? My father was rendered speechless and continued to turn in a sluggish circle as he absorbed the surroundings of the room. He appeared to be completely perplexed. Landon emerged from the kitchen with a tray containing glasses of iced tea before I could respond. He was 16 years old, tall and handsome, with my eyes and Alex's confident expression. He stated, "You must be my grandparents," in a polite and composed tone. He placed the tray on the ground. "It is a pleasure to finally meet you." They gazed at him in profound fascination. He was present, the source of their disgrace, a young man who was alive, breathing, and impressive. My mother stammered, He's wonderful, but..." The small conversation was stilted and awkward. They inquired about Landon's academic performance, as he was a top performing student at a distinguished private academy. They inquired about his interests. He served as the captain of the debate team and volunteered at an animal shelter. Their expressions of astonishment and regret became increasingly profound with each response. It was then that the moment arrived that I had been anticipating. The moment of undeniable, silent truth. "Grandma, Grandpa," Landon said, withdrawing his phone from his pocket. "My mother informed me that you were never permitted to view any photographs. I possess a few that I would like to present to you." He selected the initial photograph. It was a photograph of him and a man in surgical garb, both of whom were beaming, standing in front of a large Boston hospital. Landon casually remarked, "This is my father and me from last summer, Da. He is a cardiothoracic surgeon. He desired for me to inform you that he extends a warm greeting." My mother exhaled. The complexion of my father's face became rather pale. They had envisioned the unnamed, faceless child as a low-life delinquent, but he was actually a respected doctor. Their meticulously crafted account of my downfall was disintegrating before their very eyes. Landon then selected the second image. It was a photograph that I was previously unaware that he possessed. I was depicted as a speaker at a significant healthcare conference, standing at a podium. The Harrington Medical logo was displayed on the expansive screen that was situated behind me. I appeared to be in my element, confident and potent. My father's mouth was slightly agape as he gazed at the image. His eyes were filled with a dawning, appalled understanding as he looked from the phone to me. You constructed all of this? He finally managed to croak, gesturing vaguely at the house and the life that surrounded us. The weight of 15 years of struggle and triumph was evident in my voice, which was calm and clear as I gazed directly at him. I replied, "No, Bob. I constructed myself." The subsequent silence was complete. The power dynamic that had shaped my childhood was irrevocably shattered at that instant. I was not the daughter who disappointed them in order to obtain their approbation. They were the penitent parents, standing in a world that I had created without them, a world that they could never have imagined for me because their vision was too limited. The intensity of my mother's sobbing increased. "Emma, we are deeply regretful. We acted foolishly. We allow our pride and dread to impede us. We have overlooked an abundance of opportunities. Your absence has been felt throughout your lifetime. We have missed him," she said. Gesturing toward Landon, her voice strangled with regret. I permitted her words to remain suspended in the air. For years, I had fantasized about this moment, envisioning that I would shout, rage, or catalog each and every one of their shortcomings as parents. However, I was unable to feel any of that while standing in the stunning home I had acquired with my extraordinary son by my side. The wrath had been extinguished a long time ago, leaving only the cold, hard reality of the events. I extended my forgiveness to you a considerable amount of time ago, I declared, and I was taken aback by the sincerity of my words. I was compelled to. I was unable to construct this existence for my son while harboring all of that bitterness. I paused, allowing my gaze to travel from my mother's tear-stained face to my father's bewildered expression. However, forgiving you does not negate the actions you took. It does not imply that we can simply assume that the past 15 years did not occur and return to a state of happiness as a family. I addressed my son. Landon is the most exceptional individual I have encountered. I instilled in him the values of kindness, respect, and unconditional love. By your example, I raised him to embody everything you taught me a man should not be. I transformed into the woman you had never imagined I could be. My tone was unmistakably definitive. This was not a negotiation. It was a declaration. I briefly observed the timepiece affixed to the mantelpiece. "Landon, my dear, please retrieve your jacket." It was a simple domestic act, a signal that my life with my son was proceeding as planned, with or without them. "We are going to be late for our reservation at the bookstore cafe." The world continued to revolve. As Landon exited the room, my mother gazed at me with eyes that were beseeching. "Is it possible for us to see him again? Shall we meet again?" I led them to the front door in the same manner as my father had led me out all those years ago. I did not overlook the symmetry. "That is entirely up to you," I replied, placing my hand on the doorknob. "You are granted the option. You have the freedom to determine whether you wish to maintain a relationship with your grandson, the one you currently have in the present moment. Alternatively, you may return to your companions and continue to deny his existence. The past has concluded. The sole variable under your control is your subsequent actions." I opened the door. The sun beamed in during the afternoon. I refrained from embracing them. I refrained from making any erroneous assurances regarding forthcoming holidays or intimate family dinners. I merely stood aside and permitted them to exit. My father turned back for the final time as they stepped on a veranda, their appearance betraying a sense of loss and depletion. Emma, the residence is exquisite. "Oh, I am grateful," I replied. "I am fond of it." The solid, heavy oak of the door clicked shut with a gratifying finality as I closed it. For an extended period, I rested against it, savoring the tranquility of my residence. I was no longer an observer on the outside. I was situated within. I was the architect of this existence and the master of this house. Ultimately, the ghosts of my past were exorcised through serenity rather than anger, a fundamental and profound sense of tranquility. I had confronted them, I had disclosed my truth, and I had emerged victorious. Not by demolishing them, but by elevating myself to a level that rendered their criticism inaccessible. Landon descended the stairs with his jacket in hand. "Mom, are you feeling well?" I turned away from the door and smiled, a genuine, authentic smile that extended to my eyes. I have never been in a better state. And together, we exited the house and entered the remainder of our beautiful, self made existence.